I do not know what the markets are doing right now, and they're very, very confusing to me. NVIDIA had great earnings yesterday, and the stock is down this morning. So I just have no idea why the market has the jitters. I think it's because Kamala Harris might win this election. Now, there's a good story yesterday over at the American Conservative on why Kamala Harris is not actually ahead. And it's a decent theory. I'm not a pollster. It's not unwinding the polls. It's not talking about the sample size. It's talking about overreaction bias. It turns out that older white women tend to answer polls far more willingly than older white women conservatives and older white men, both liberal and conservatives. Older white liberal women tend to talk to pollsters far more. So it over selects for their responses and it throws off that demo. And it's a very complicated, very interesting thing. But I would leave it to you. I put a link over at Hugh Hewitt on X, and I'll retweet it on HHS links. And I may include a discussion of it with Noah Rothman when Noah comes along this hour and post it at my YouTube channel. So I'm hoping you will go along with it. I'll talk to Selena Zito about it as well coming up at the bottom of the hour. But in the meantime, the markets are taking this all in, and they don't know what to do. But gold is what people are doing. It went up $18 yesterday to $2,555 an ounce. If you're going to buy gold because you think this uncertainty is going to continue and that the Chinese are going to continue to buy gold and you want to diversify, do it with our friends at AmericanFederal.com. Great sponsor. The sponsor I've always wanted is AmFed.com. AmericanFederal.com is where you get American Federal coin and bullion. You can also call them at 800-221-7694, 800-221-7694. And when you get there and when you see it, you will be able to understand why they're so good at their job. They're very straightforward, very, very honest, very clear about what gold costs today, how you have to have the cash in hand to buy gold, what their commission is, and if you're selling gold, because they do buy gold, and a lot of people are just out of money. Because of the Biden-Harris economy, they're out of money, and they're selling necklaces and gold coins and whatever they got. Do it with Nick and team so that you get a fair price. 800-221-7694. Also want to remind everyone, Battleground Talkers Tour is coming up. Go to battlegroundtour.com. We're going to hit the roads beginning in Detroit in late October. I hope you'll come out and see us. There'll be a bunch of us in various places. Also want to remind you, coming up next hour is part 2 of my interview with Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation, which I did yesterday. Heritage is a great sponsor of ours, and 25truth.com, 25, the number 25truth.com is about Project 2025. And I want you to listen to the Kevin Roberts interview. I did part 1 yesterday, and part 2 will air today. Also, I want you to know about Americans for Prosperity. I'm telling you about it early today because we need to get people involved in the best grassroots organization in the swing states. Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada. Those are the 7 swings. I'm feeling best about Georgia and North Carolina. I'm feeling pretty good about Pennsylvania because Kamala Harris, campaign spokesman, came out yesterday and said, no, she doesn't support fracking. Now, she might change her mind again. That's a flip, flop, flip. And it's sort of like Joe Biden on whether he'll use military force against China if they intend to invade Taiwan. He's flip, flop, flip, flop, flip, flop. I'll ask Dave McCormick about that a little bit later today, but Americans for Prosperity have a network in Pennsylvania. I'm not too sure of the Republican Party network up there, but AmericansForProsperity.org, that's where you go to get yourself involved in a grassroots organization that will actually, look, Pennsylvania could be a 1-vote election. I wouldn't be surprised if it's worse than Florida in 2000, which was 500 votes, right? I would not be surprised by any of that. So get over to AmericansForProsperity.org and get involved. Don't forget to take your relief factor with you. Taking it this morning as I do every day at this time. Only did 4 miles yesterday, but it should be longer because we took the kids and their little one out last night for dinner at one of the brewing companies that Maine loves. And they're always the same. They're giant auditoriums. And, of course, this is an invitation for a 2-year-old. She's a runner, right? So there are either toddlers who stay put, don't leave mom or dad, and then they bolt. She bolts all the time. And she's very funny when she runs. But someone's got to go. So it was my tag team. So it's sprinting. I'm not used to sprinting. So I'm here to tell you Relief Factor works in all situations. Call 1-800-4RELIEF to get your discounted first package. Or go to relieffactor.com or just type Relief Factor in any search engine. You'll be happy that you did. Big night tonight. Big night tonight. Dana Bash sits down with Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. The reason Governor Walz is there, as I will explain, I'm going to read for you my Fox News column this morning. I want you to send it everywhere. It's the 15 questions that Dana Bash should ask. When I interviewed President Trump a week ago yesterday, I did more than 24 questions in 35 minutes. So I think there ought to be room for at least 24 questions if Harris doesn't filibuster and if Walz does not interrupt. But Dana Bash is a pro. I've got great expectations for this tonight. I think she will ask serious questions, and I will explain in the column the 15 that I think need to be asked. Other news happened yesterday, though, and I want you to know that the Supreme Court blocked Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness. This is not surprising. They have done it before. Everybody knows it's unconstitutional. Joe Biden knew it. He was buying votes when he was still a viable candidate. It must stop. Number two, there is no controversy about the Arlington Cemetery visit involving President Trump. The families of the fallen invited the former president and invited him to bring videographers and a photographer because they wanted it memorialized. I believe J.D. Vance had the exact correct response to the non-story that's being ginned up by the New York Times, the Washington Post. The New York Times headline is Trump videos at Arlington stir more fallout after a gravesite visit. No, they don't. Veterans support Trump. Veterans support Vance. And here is Vance talking to this issue in Pennsylvania yesterday. I believe it is cut number 14.
Well, I think, first of all, the altercation at Arlington Cemetery is the media creating a story where I really don't think that there is one. There is verifiable evidence. There is verifiable evidence that the campaign was allowed to have a photographer there. There's verifiable, they were invited to have a photographer there. There's verifiable evidence that the families of these poor people who had their loved ones die 3 years ago at Abbey Road, Abbey Gate, those 13 Americans, a lot of them were there with the president. They invited him to be there and to support them. That's not an insult to the memories of their loved ones. They wanted Donald Trump there, and thank God that we have a president who stands with our veterans instead of one who runs away from them. Now it is amazing to me that you have apparently somebody at Arlington Cemetery, some staff member, had a little disagreement with somebody, and the media has turned this into a national news story. You know what I think our veterans care a lot more about? That Kamala Harris's VP nominee lied about his military service. I think that our veterans care a lot more about that. And the other thing our veterans care a lot more about is that 3 years ago, 13 brave, innocent Americans died, and they died because Kamala Harris refused to do her job, and there hasn't been a single investigation or a single firing. Look, sometimes mistakes happen. That's just the nature of government, the nature of military service. But to have those 13 Americans lose their lives and not fire a single person is disgraceful. Kamala Harris is disgraceful. We're going to talk about a story out of those 13 brave, innocent Americans who lost their lives. It's that Kamala Harris is so asleep at the wheel that she won't even do an investigation into what happened, and she wants to yell at Donald Trump because he showed up. She can go to hell.
And I believe, by the way, that resonates because America knows the cover-up happened at Abbey Gate. They know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris screwed that up completely. They know that cued Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. It probably cued Iran to encourage Hamas on 10/7. American weakness is provocative, and the most weak we've ever been in my lifetime is at Abbey Gate. It was a disaster. Now back to tonight's interview. All right, I have 15 questions. If you go to foxnews.com, You go to the opinion page. I always have a Morning Glory column on Tuesdays and Thursdays when the Tuesday doesn't follow a national holiday. There won't be one there on Tuesday because it's a national holiday on Monday. But the new column is the 15 questions, and I want to read through them for you so that you have them handy and you send this column. The column is posted and linked at my X account and at HHS links. That's the second one I've done for people who don't want to hear about the Browns and the Guardians and the Cavs. They just want the politics. Here are the questions which Bash should pose to Kamala Harris. 1. President Biden named you to lead the effort to stem the flow of migrants across our southern border in March of 2021. That did not happen. Why? 2. How many people entered the country without invitation since you and Joe Biden took over? 3. What was your role in the withdrawal of Afghanistan? 4. In your acceptance speech, you noted the horrors that occurred in Israel on 10/7, as well as, your phrase, at the same time as the loss of innocent life in Gaza. Was it your intent, Madam Vice President, in any way to equate the massacre on 10/7 with the Israeli Defense Forces' actions in Gaza since then? 5. Did Israel have the right this past weekend to strike Hezbollah in a preemptive attack on the terrorist missile force? 6. Does Israel have the right to strike Iran to preempt another attack from Iran? Remember, Iran attacked Israel in April. 7. If Israel is attacked by Iran, would it be legitimate for Israel? If Israel is attacked by Iran again, would it be legitimate for Israel to destroy the oil export facilities on Karg Island? 8. If China attempts to invade Taiwan, will American military force be used to defend the island nation? 9. Should the Supreme Court be expanded in its size? 10. How much of the GDP should be spent on the Pentagon? 11. How do you fix the recruitment crisis our military is experiencing? 12. America's ability to lead and indeed dominate in artificial intelligence and supercomputing requires at least a doubling of our total domestic energy output. That is easiest to accomplish with new, modern, very safe nuclear power plants. Do you support building such plants? 13. You were absolutely against fracking in your 2019 presidential campaign. What is your policy on fracking now? And if it changed, why? 14. What is the highest marginal tax rate you would see enacted into law, and at what level of adjusted gross income should that rate apply? And 15, this is a soft question, what is the most significant issue on which you have disagreed with President Biden? Okay, I conclude the column this way. Note that these are all direct and simple questions. A rule of serious journalists in the broadcast arena is not to pose multiple questions at the same time, and only the last question, actually the penultimate question, about the highest marginal tax rate and the level of AGI at which it would apply, includes a request for two answers, as those two answers are inextricably connected. One question at a time obliges the guest to focus and to respond to questions. Bash is very good at her business. If Dana stays true to the mission of informing the public, an already excellent reputation on her part will grow even stronger. Now that's over at Fox News, and I want you to send it everywhere. It's at my X account, and we're going to post this over at my YouTube account. I want you to follow me and subscribe at YouTube, please, so that you can get every interview that I do. I'm about to talk to Dr. Orrin about what's going on in Israel right now and the aftermath of the rescue of the hostage and whether or not the offensive is close to wrapping up. Are they closing in on Sinwar? I'm going to talk to him about that after the break. But my bottom line tonight, more than Kamala Harris can lose the race tonight. She can't win it. She can lose it. Because I just don't think she has this to be president. And I think even a mildly direct interview, these are not ambush questions. It's not like, who's the governor of Fiji? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about very big issues. And mindless attacks on Donald Trump of the sort that we heard repeatedly day after day at the DNC should not satisfy Dana Bash. We need to know what the vice president thinks and whether she can actually express herself. And about that, I've got grave concern. She took a couple of swings at it yesterday, going back to trying to communicate on the stump. Didn't go very well. Just did not go very well yesterday at Liberty County High School in Hinesville, Georgia, cut number 24.
And I will tell you, I was in band when I was your age. So I know a little bit about, coach knows about the players, right? And all that you all are doing, it requires a whole lot of rehearsal, a whole lot of practice, long hours, right? Sometimes you hit the note, sometimes you don't.
Sometimes you hit the note, sometimes you don't. Kamala Harris very rarely hits the note. Cut number 25. Talking to the role model club. I mean, this is not talking to a club. She's trying to talk about being a role model. Cut number 25.
So, I've been hearing about you incredible young leaders for quite some time, from the players to those who are bringing joy to everybody in the stands, to the music that you guys are creating. And so we wanted to come by just to let you know that our country is counting on you. All of you. You are leaders. By the very fact that you all are here in this room, doing what you do at this incredible school, doing it as one big team, understanding all of the different parts that fit together to create a team. You are doing some of the best work any leader can do. And we're so proud of you. And we're counting on you. Your generation, all that you guys stand for, everything you have at stake is what is going to propel our country into the next era of what we can do and what we can be. And I want to say to you that you must always lead as you have chosen to lead. Understanding you don't have to ask anybody's permission to lead. And I think you all have figured that out. You've decided to be a leader.
All right, look, she's using her hands. It's awful. She cannot do this. She's awful at campaigning. And they're not all leaders in that room. They're band kids. I love band kids. Dwayne was a band parent. We've talked about band kids for a long time. Guaranteed there is a leader or two in there, but they're not all leaders. But she's just trying to give a coach talk, and Tim Walz is back there like a Bobo doll nodding. I'll tell you, I don't know what's going to happen tonight. Dr. Michael Oren, Israel's former ambassador to the United States, also a former deputy minister in the Netanyahu government. Good morning, Dr. Oren. Congratulations to you and all of Israel on a successful preemptive strike on Hezbollah. Has there been any criticism of Israel for that action?
Yeah, from me.
Explain, please. Not enough? Not soon enough?
You may want to hold up your congratulations. I have a lot of reservations about that operation. A lot of them. It was a great feat of military prowess. Certainly, 100 airplanes in the sky, basically intercepted, interdicted Hezbollah's attempt to send some rockets into central Israel. All that's great. And it may have helped convince Mr. Sinwar that he doesn't have a military option, because the head of Hamas was hoping for a war to break out between Iran, Hezbollah, and Israel that would have relieved pressure on him and put more pressure on Israel to reach a favorable hostage release deal that he's not going to get. That all that's good. Here's the downside, and it's a huge downside. Okay, Israel broadcast to the Middle East, to the world, that it feared getting into a full-scale war with Hezbollah. It backed down. Israel reacted when there was a threat on Tel Aviv, but we've had an ongoing daily threat to the northern part of Israel for the last 10 and a half months, and 100 warplanes haven't taken up to the sky. So it created a situation in Israel where the people of the north feel once again abandoned. They feel that the northern Israeli life is cheaper than Israeli life in Tel Aviv, and they're deeply, deeply disappointed and embittered by it. And guess what? We've gone back to the daily horrific routine of being shelled on my phone, on a pretty much a hourly basis. I get the red alerts that tell me when rockets and drones are striking in northern Israel. It is continued unabated. So what exactly we did? Yeah, we averted a larger regional conflagration, but don't let anybody tell you that we averted a regional conflagration, because guess what? We've been in one for the last 10 months.
Now,
And
Dr.
we
Warren,
don't know. At
I
the
don't
end of the
disagree.
day,
I don't disagree with anything you've
last point,
said, but go ahead.
last point is Hezbollah remains deployed along the northern border, right up to the fence. Nobody in Israel is going back to those border communities as long as Hezbollah is sitting there.
I get that. I get that. Here's my, not a counter argument, my observation. Tonight, Dana Bash sits down with Kamala Harris. I would like her, I've listed the 15 questions I want her to ask. I want her to ask, was Israel acting within its right when it struck Hezbollah preemptively? Then I want her to ask if, because I assume the vice president is going to say yes, then if that's the case, is Israel justified in acting preemptively against Iran? And if Iran attacks Israel again, ought Israel to destroy Cargill and oil production facilities? I think in the context of American politics, the strike on Hezbollah set up a very interesting situation in terms of what this candidate believes. Because I think she'll be the most anti-Israel president in the history of the Jewish state. I know you don't have to comment on that, but that's what I firmly believe. And I want her on record on whether or not she really does believe Israel has a right to defend itself, because she said that. How do you think she would answer those questions?
I think when in doubt, duck. I think there's creative ways you can get around the question, saying Israel has a right to defend itself, certainly, but we're going to work tirelessly to ensure that the situation in the Middle East does not escalate, and that we're going to bring various parties to the negotiating table, and we're going to rely on diplomacy.
But then the follow-up should be, but Israel acted last weekend. Were they justified in doing so? Because I don't think you disagree with me. You were justified in doing so. They were going to crush Tel Aviv.
Yeah, we were more than justified. We had a great casus belli. We could have carried it much further, and we didn't. And we allowed all of northern Israel to go back under shell fire as if nothing had happened. And there's been no real. We may have deterred Hezbollah from trying to strike at Tel Aviv just now, but certainly didn't deter it from striking at a major share of Israel's territory and population. So that's my reservation. I think I've made that clear. I don't know what Kamala Harris is going to say. I think it's very hard to gainsay Israel's right to preempt last week. I think there's going to be a harder case to say that we have a right to preempt Iran's nuclear program. Certainly a question that should be asked to any presidential candidate. Does the United States put every option on the table, including a military option, to prevent Iran from acquiring military nuclear capabilities, period?
We certainly have the forces in the region to assist Israel in accomplishing that mission right now. Dr. Oren, I'd like you to stick around for a couple extra seconds, because I listened to Nadav Eyal talk to Dan Senor this week, and he talked about the North and the political problem it generates. And I want to go back to that, because it's a reality that not many Americans are aware of, that the north of Israel is empty. It's ghost town after ghost town. And more than 100,000 people have been exiled from their homes for 11 months, and their children aren't going to go to school for the second year in a row. And this is a major issue that has to be resolved. I think it's going to be resolved by a ground invasion of Lebanon. Dr. Oren, from the beginning of this war, but certainly in the last 3 months, I've been telling people, this reminds me of every history book I've read about World War II. After we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, America, FDR sat down with Churchill and they decided Europe first. Then we deal with Japan. Although we're gonna work with Japan. We had Midway and we were doing island hopping. First we beat Hitler, then we beat Japan. And everyone agreed, including Stalin, that that was the way we're going to go. Isn't Netanyahu doing something of the same, which is finish Hamas, then I'm going to go for Hezbollah, and if Iran gets involved, I'm going to go get them? Because that's what I think's going on. It's a 2-year war, not a 1-year war.
Well, I know the argument very well, and there's merit to it. Right now, the amount of troops we have in Gaza wouldn't actually substantiate that. Gaza is not the equivalent of Normandy Beach or the Battle of the Bulge. There are very small forces in Gaza right now operating, and there are forces a lot across the northern border. And it's not just a matter of soldiers. We talk about, you said, you assumed Israel would launch a ground invasion of southern Lebanon. I wouldn't rule that out, but we have other capabilities and conventional capabilities. I've said openly that Israel should announce that the population of southern Lebanon has 30 hours to remove uh, north of the Litani River, and then anything south of the Litani River is going to be a legitimate target. And we have to remove Hezbollah from the northern border. It would be beneficial. It would certainly be better if we could have a diplomatic option. The United States has a special envoy, Amos Hochstein, trying to achieve that, trying to get retroactive Hezbollah acceptance of Resolution 1701 from 2006 from the UN Security Council, which Hezbollah routinely violated, flagrantly violated the day after it was accepted. I don't know what leverage the United States has to bring to bear on Hezbollah to get it to retreat under fire from the border. So we have no choice. At the end of the day, if we are to live in a country where not the top third of it is uninhabitable, we're going to have to push Hezbollah away from that border, and we're going to have to do it sooner or later. How long can you keep this entire population being uprooted from their homes and not cause irreparable damage to the very DNA of this country?
So that is my last question. If Netanyahu orders the invasion of Lebanon and the destruction of Hezbollah at least south of the Litani, what percentage of Israelis will support him?
Very large. The polls all show that the majority of Israelis support a full-scale war with Hezbollah at this time.
So doesn't Netanyahu always do that which politically advantages Netanyahu?
No. Sometimes he has a different strategic vision. And very much in contrast to his public image of being very, pugilistic and militaristic, he is actually conflict averse. He doesn't like war. He doesn't like conflict. And he's doing his best not to expand this conflict. I think at the end of the day, he'll have no choice. And, we in Israel, we divide wars between wars of choice and wars of no choice. 67 was a war of no choice. 82, the first Lebanon war, was a war of choice. This throughout has been a war of no choice, whether in the south or in the north. And having a status of no choice greatly, how should I say, constricts the decision making spectrum that at the disposal of Israeli leaders.
All right, last question, Dr. Orrin, 2 minutes. In her acceptance speech, Kamala Harris said 10/7 was awful, it was terrible, it was horrible, and Hamas is a terrorist organization. Direct quote. At the same time, the suffering in Gaza is immense. Was that moral equivalence, and how did that strike your ear?
It smacks of moral equivalence. It could have been much worse. Could have been saying that Israel is causing that suffering. Of course, they're suffering in Gaza. The question is, who's causing the suffering in Gaza? We can't deny that suffering, but the suffering is being caused by Hamas, which is fighting not just behind its civilian population, but fighting under them. So it leaves a little bit of a leeway for interpretation. It could have been worse.
I hope they clarify it tonight. Dr. Michael Orrin, I've kept you long. Thank you. I appreciate the candor.
Great.
Hopefully,
good to be with you.
Next week, by this time, we'll get more clarity. Bye-bye. Joined by Noah Rothman, Noah C. Rothman on X. He is a senior political writer for National Review, and he's now being driven in for a Fox News hit, no doubt. Noah, big night tonight. The vice president gives her first interview in 39 days. Do you have confidence in Dana Bash? I do.
I think I'm reasonably confident that she's going to try to ask some very tough questions. Not all of them will be barn burners. I don't suspect Republicans will be 100% satisfied with her performance. But, they often cite her work inadvertently, even if they don't know it, when they talk about, for example, Kamala Harris saying that she takes a fair amount of credit for withdrawal in Afghanistan. That was the result of a Dana Bash inquiry. So I suspect that we'll get a couple of questions that will be illuminating enough that they will have some shelf life and move the news cycle in ways that we haven't had a news cycle move over the last month and a week, 5 weeks.
I agree, and I
work. Good work.
I did 4 debates with her in 2016, 2 with Jake, 2 with Wolf, and 4 with Dana. And she's a very, very serious about doing the job, and she does not want to end up in Candy Crowley land. Nevertheless, I have put out at Fox News a column with 15 questions. I want you to grade these questions, something that you always do on the editor's podcast, A to B, A to F. Question 1, President Biden named you as the lead in the effort to stem the flow of migrants against our southern border in March of 2021. That did not happen. Why? What's your letter grade?
That's an A+ question. And one of the things that I'm expecting, if they get to border policy, I'll be very surprised. There's a lot of area to cover, and that's not one that I think either CNN or Kamala Harris will be eager to get into. But that's an important question. And also, you have the New York Times talking about how Joe Biden is enjoying the benefits of his executive order clamping down on the border, which he said he could not do without legislation authorizing him to do that. Do Republicans get credit for that? Do Republicans get credit for saying you don't need legislative authorization to execute the powers that you already have? And they've been proven right. So are Republicans justified in their opposition? But A+ question on that first one.
All right, second question. How many people have entered the country without invitation since you and Joe Biden took over? How do you grade that
She
question?
won't even know the answer to that. I mean, it's a good question, but no, Democrats will regard that as a gotcha question. If you need to know an exact figure, and I don't know the exact figure, so I would suspect that's arcane knowledge that Democrats would object to, and they'll say, Dana put her finger on the trigger, because she won't be able to
Ought
answer
that to be arcane? We don't have any idea from them. It's at least 10 million. Trump says 20 million.
So it is a trick question.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's a good question, but it's not one that she can answer specifically.
What was your role in the withdrawal from Afghanistan?
That's one I'd love to hear. I'm also going to say an A on that question, but I don't think it's an answer because I think she was not being truthful when she said that, when she nodded essentially and acknowledged her role. She didn't say anything really. She just acknowledged the premise that she was asked. Were you the last person in the room talking to Joe Biden about his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan? I think she just wanted to emphasize her role as being second in command to Joe Biden and, her importance to this administration. Not that she had some actual role in planning or certainly executing the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. So that's a good one because she's stuck on that one. I don't think the answer is.
I've got 3 A's.
She
I should quit while I'm ahead. I've got 3 A's. I'm doing well. This has never happened to me actually in my academic life. Cut number 4.
Yes. Okay.
In your acceptance speech,
I'm gonna be harder.
You noted the horror. Okay, this is number 1. In your acceptance speech, you noted that horrors occurred in Israel on 10/7, as well as the loss of innocent life in Gaza. Was it your intent to equate the massacre on 10/7 with Israel's actions in Gaza since then? How do you rate that question?
That's also, I'm gonna be harder now, and I'm gonna say B+ because that would give her an opportunity to say things about the U.S.-Israel relationship that I don't think she believes. I don't think she honestly is as supportive of the Israeli mission and the U.S. alliance as she is making herself out to be for the benefit of a general election audience that generally supports Israel over the Palestinian cause. I would like her to explain why she believes exactly why and where Israel went too far in her estimation in this war, and why there is this that allows her to establish a moral equivalence. I would like to tease out the moral equivalence that she intends to draw between the Palestinians and the the Hamas really, and the Israeli Defense Forces. I would lean more heavily into Joe Biden's language than her own language. She's inheriting a series of policies, and is she going to perpetuate them? That's my question.
My thinking was that sets up the next 3, and I'll give them to you. Question number 5. Did Israel have the right this past weekend to strike Hezbollah in a preemptive attack on the terrorist missile force? 6. Does Israel have the right to strike Iran to preempt another attack from Iran? And 7. If Israel is attacked by Iran, would it be legitimate for Israel to destroy the oil export facilities on Karg Island? The reason I do it this way, Noah, is I have a rule of thumb. Never ask multiple questions. Don't put one question in a question in order for the subject to have to answer it. So I'm trying to get to where you want to go, but I think she's got to do it in steps, not ask 4 questions so we get a word salad.
Yeah, and it's not going to be all foreign policy either, much as we would like it to be. And I would add that will you provide intelligence, material, and logistics support for an Israeli operation aimed at neutralizing the Iranian nuclear program? But beyond those, yes, I understand that we want to bundle all these questions together. But the editors at National Review were going back and forth over how you should talk about all the policies she has shifted from 2019 to today. And it could take the whole interview if we were to go through all of them. So, we were going back and forth over whether you bundle them all together. And like you said, the consensus is that she'll get to say, "Oh, I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about the future.
Yeah, that you
Joy
got to
and
ask
music
about.
and our love of
Yeah,
dancing."
yeah. She did it yesterday at the high school. It was so cringe-inducing in Georgia. The most important domestic policy question is number 9. Should the Supreme Court be expanded in its size? It's a very simple question. I'd like to know what she thinks about court packing. Do you think Dana will ask it?
I think she will, and I think Kamala Harris's default will be to say, "Yeah, well, Joe Biden posited this plan in the waning days of his campaign, where he was just desperately trying to hold on to power by baiting the left into the progressive left into supporting him." I think she'll lean into that. What I want to know is whether Sheldon Whitehouse is accurate when he says that he had verbal assurances from Kamala Harris's staff for his Supreme Court reform bill, which is a little bit more extreme than that. She might dodge a question that says
She
"Do
can
you
dodge
support
that by saying, I haven't read the specifics. Yeah, I'm trying to avoid
Yeah.
dodges. Here's the last one I want to test on you. I've got more than this. You can read the column yourself if you want. But I think this is a must-ask question. And Dana will fail if she does not ask this question. Madam Vice President, you were absolutely against fracking in your 2019 presidential campaign. What is your policy on fracking now? Because they did it again
And
yesterday.
why?
They changed it twice. Doesn't that have
They
to be
did.
asked?
I would
Yeah,
hope it would have to
spokespeople
be
did.
asked. It's an electoral spokespeople, exactly. It's an electorally significant question. I think it resonates with a small subset of voters who are very, very relevant to this election. I don't know if it's a general interest question. It's something that we are very concerned about, and people in Western and Eastern Ohio Eastern Pennsylvania are very interested in. But not just what is your position today, but why did it evolve? What were the inducements? What did you learn? Did you discover new information? Have you talked to new people? Or is the subtextually, or is it quite obviously a pander to an electorally important subset of voters that you will abandon the second you no longer need them?
Now, in this column, I call Tim Walz her blankie. I would absolutely, at the beginning of this, say, Governor Walz, I will ask you a question, but I'm going to begin with the vice president. I ask you to respect the audience and not interrupt her answers. Do you think he's there as a parachute, a way to get out, like the escape hatch?
That the Walls factor is one that I'm really interested in, because to the extent Governor Walz has made news since his selection on August 6th, it has been for his reputation now that he's developing as a fabulist, as an exaggerator. Some of it really quite inexcusable. And the progressive left has made up a lot of excuses about what rank he retired at and why he said all that. But we don't know why he exaggerated, in fact, flat out lied about the use of IVF as a fertilization process with his wife. We don't know why he misled voters in Minnesota about the nature of his 1995 DUI arrest, what he told arresting officers, which is not accurate. The Harris campaign has a truth problem around Governor Walz, and there's not much else that's newsy that's worth asking him. He should clarify.
I agree. I think he's going to step in when she gets in trouble. That's what he's there for. See, Dwayne's World, that's our new podcast offering, which you can find at iTunes, at Salem Podcast. Everywhere there are podcasts, you can find Dwayne's World. And that's the music by Gomez that opens it. And that's Dwayne's World, right? That's Skinny Dwayne because of myphdweightloss.com. Go to myphdweightloss.com, 864-644-1900. That's 644-1900. So I'm curious, Dwayne, in the new edition of Dwayne's World that dropped yesterday that's available, it's about the interview tonight.
A lot of it is, yeah.
Yeah. Did you review what you want to hear Dana ask?
I actually said the same thing that you said. I didn't actually list out all the questions. To me, I think Dana Bash is really on the clock at this point. And you kind of made a reference to this earlier in your Fox piece, which is this is kind of a big journalistic moment for her in how she's going to play this. She's under as much pressure as Kamala Harris is in a different way. And for all the people that want to just assume that Dana Bash is going to be in the tank and CNN is this, I'm not exactly there yet, because you got to remember, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash really did a pretty good job at the debate.
What I remember is I know Dana pretty well. I recommended her to the RNC as a debate moderator when we were bidding for debates with Salem and CNN in the spring. We ended up doing it with NBC because CNN imploded. It had nothing to do with Dana, but she's a very fine journalist.
She certainly has the chops to do it, and she has shown those chops several times.
But what I was getting at is, because it's a myphdweightloss.com embed, is that if it was you, you'd be stress eating right now.
If I were the one doing the debate tonight, I would probably be, yes, I would probably be blowing the diet. Yes.
So myphdweightloss.com realizes that people do go off course, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And they get you back on the balance beam.
Absolutely.
That's what I was trying to get to, though, because Skinny Dwayne on Dwayne's World. Put up that picture if you would, Harley, because people should see. This is Skinny Dwayne in that picture for his podcast. And if that had been taken 2 years ago, that globe would be crushed into little bits. By the way, we got an attaboy on our brand new feature at the Universe.
We've had a bunch. We've had a bunch, actually.
What's the general consensus among the Dwayniacs?
It's actually unanimous. That number one, they absolutely adore the content. They love the fact that we're doing this. I mean, this is absolute red slabs of meat on a plate. They absolutely love the fact that we're doing it. Number one. Number two, of course, people within the universe, they love me. They think I'm right on everything on what we have hashed out over so far.
Well, if you're a member of the universe and you can
looked?
join for a month free trial, I believe, you can go listen to the air check, because after the show is done, I have never done that. And I've been on the radio since 1990. I do not do air checks, because nobody knows how to do my show better than me, and I know when it's messed up. But now I'm doing an air check is a term of art in the radio business where the program director hauls the talent into their office and say, let's go over what you did today, and they yell at them.
It's basically giving me a chance to be ombudsman of the show.
Yeah,
is what it's.
Yeah, and so it's fun, and I pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Not.
But air check is now got its own little button, I believe, at the universe. But if you want to be a member, if you want to listen to Aircheck, you got to join the universe. You don't have to join the universe to listen to Dwayne's World. You can listen to that at iTunes, Spotify, Dwayne's World. And you don't have to listen to Highly Concentrated Hugh at the universe. You can get Highly Concentrated Hugh at iTunes. Harley puts that up every day, and we appreciate that he does. We are in the Relief Factor studio. And I took it in the first hour, and I remind you right now, midway through the show, don't leave home without it. Some of you are just waking up. Some of you have gotten into the car. Some of you are already hurting. Some of you are already bemoaning the fact that you did not take a leave or Advil or ibuprofen or anything before you left. What you should have done is started 3 weeks ago to take the relieffactor.com. You'd already feel better. All right, it doesn't mask pain. It reduces inflammation in concert with your body's natural anti-inflammatory system. But your job is to take it 3 times a day for the first 3 weeks and then once a day thereafter for maintenance. That first package, that's heavily discounted for you. So just go to Relief Factor and get it. You can call them too, 1-800-4RELIEF. Go to relieffactor.com. Try it, because if you're in pain right now, you ought to try something that really does work for a lot of people. Good morning, Dave. First, a general question. How goes the campaign?
You know, it feels great, honestly. I mean, I'm going down the home stretch here, Hugh. As you know, I'm a wrestler, and I always said that if I could be within a couple points going into the third period here, I'd win, because at that point it's all about hard work, and that's where we are. The campaign's going well. It feels like there's good momentum across our great Commonwealth. The polls are closing, and I think most important, we are running right now against Kamala Harris, who is the most liberal nominee in the modern history of the Democratic Party, and Bob Casey, who is a rubber stamp career politician who's voted 98% of the time with Harris and Biden. And that radical agenda, the banning of fracking, the mandatory buybacks of guns, the legalization of illegal immigration, the federal benefits, all those issues are completely out of step with Pennsylvanians. And then on top of that, people are terribly upset by the inflation, by the fentanyl crisis that's happened under the Biden-Harris-Casey regime. So I'm optimistic. It's going to be close, but I feel pretty good about it.
All right, DaveMcCormickPA.com if you want to help out Dave. The reason I'm optimistic is that everybody and their brother knows as Pennsylvania goes, so goes this election. So Trump Vance is going to be there all the time. You're going to have to do like 1,000 events with Trump or Vance. That's good, isn't it? I mean, you are going to be the centerpiece of campaign 2024.
Well, President Trump has been here a number of times already, and I've been to a number of events with him. And listen, here's what I honestly believe. I think he absolutely helps. He's going to ensure a great turnout for Republicans. We got to win big with our base of voters. There's 67 counties, 58 of them are red. I mean, this is a state that's increasingly becoming red, and I'm hopeful. I say this with humility. I'm hopeful I can really help President Trump, because I think I can appeal to some voters that may be on the fence, and I can get them over to vote for me and also vote for President Trump. And we're very aligned. And there's no doubt that both of us are campaigning on the fact that if Harris, Casey win, they're going to take our country over the edge, where we're going to lose some of the building blocks of what's made America great. We're not going to recognize this great country without secure borders, without common sense economic policy, without strength on the global stage. And we don't have those things under Biden-Harris, and it's going to get a heck of a lot worse if Kamala Harris wins the presidency. And the thing I keep saying, and there's lots of evidence for it, Bob Casey's a sure thing. He is a 98% vote for this liberal radical agenda that's out of step with Pennsylvania. And I think people recognize that. We got to make that case for the next 60 days, but I think people recognize that and are beginning to recognize that across the Commonwealth. That agenda, that liberal San Francisco agenda, is just out of touch with Pennsylvania.
And then you add in Tim Walz, and everybody knows it's the most radical major party ticket since World War II by a lot. It's not even close to Obama. It's way out there. Now, Dave McCormick, I hate PolitiFact. I hate them. I think they are left-wing activists disguised as journalists, and they never get it right. They often get it wrong. But shock and surprise, shock and awe, they almost got something right. Bob Casey was absolutely lying through his teeth, but they said it was mostly false what Bob Casey said. Would you give us the background on the day that I have to say PolitiFact was almost right on something?
Yeah, well, listen, this is, hope springs eternal here. These guys got it right. But, there's been a track record of Bob Casey lying over and over again. He's lied about my positions. PolitiFact said he's false on his claims that I'm for banning abortion. But yesterday they came out and said that Bob Casey's claims that inflation, the rise in prices, the spiraling out of control prices, are the result of greedflation and shrinkflation. It's the private sector that's gouging the customers. That's his claim. And PolitiFact said that's false, mostly false. And that the cause of inflation, the cause of these runaway prices, is the extreme spending that's taken place under Biden-Harris-Casey. $5 trillion of new spending, and the war on fossil fuels, which is particularly damaging for Pennsylvania. That's the cause. And even, listen, Larry Summers, a Democrat mainstream economist, the San Francisco Fed, all these people have said that the cause of inflation is this runaway spending. And so Bob Casey is trying to change the conversation. I learned early on in the military and in life, one of the key things about leadership is accountability, owning your decisions. And Bob Casey said, go big or go home. This spending is going to not create inflation. And then behind closed doors, he acknowledges that it would. So he's
Bob
lying
Casey
about a lot of
is
things.
he's such a weak guy. I mean, he's the weakest guy in the world. Dave McCormick, I want to go to veterans for a moment. You're a graduate of West Point. You served in the 82nd. There is a kerfuffle over Arlington. I believe it is a manufactured controversy because I've gone to Arlington often. I've taken pictures often. The families of the fallen invited President Trump to go. They asked him to bring a videographer. I'm going to ask Tom Cotton next hour. He was in the old guard. But what do you make of this story? It's a made-up story.
Well, I think it's a made-up story on top of many made-up stories. And I wasn't there obviously, but I've read the accounts of this, and here you have these families. 13 families lost a loved one in the botched withdrawal of Afghanistan. It's an absolute disgrace. It was honestly the catalyst, the straw that broke the camel's back for me running last time was this weak leadership under Biden, Harris, Casey in Afghanistan, and even to this day, Biden and Harris have never mentioned the names of those 13 fallen men and women. This is a disgrace, and I think President Trump, at their invitation, is honoring their service, honoring their sacrifice, and to have this sort of be blown up and politicized. But they weren't shooting a commercial there. He was there to honor the fallen, and now it's being used for political gain. And this is happening over and over again. Listen, I don't know President Trump that well, but I've been with him a couple times in the last few months. I see time and again things that I've actually heard him say being misrepresented in the press. And God knows things I said and say are lied about over and over again. And I'm terribly disappointed by how the press has treated this campaign, the president's campaign, and my campaign. It happens over and over again. And this is what we have
I
to
think
break
they've
through.
lost their control, Dave. I really believe big media has been broken. Now, tonight, Dana Bash is sitting down with Vice President Harris. There are two questions I consider absolutely essential on the domestic side, only two. The first is, do you support expanding the Supreme Court? Because that's as radical as it gets. Even FDR had to abandon court packing. But I want it asked and answered. And then number two, and this matters a lot in Pennsylvania, in 2019, you were absolutely against fracking, Madam Vice President. What is your position now? I think she's still against fracking. What do you think, Dave McCormick? And is Bob Casey against fracking?
Yeah, listen, there's no doubt in her own words over and over again. As you know, Hugh, I've shown commercial after commercial of her saying she wants to eliminate fossil fuels. She wants to eliminate the filibuster, by the way, to be able to pass the new Green Deal and then ban fracking and transition energy workers. This would be devastating for Pennsylvania, absolutely devastating. And Bob Casey will support that liberal agenda. Bob Casey has been extremely weak on our energy sector. He voted against or voted with President Biden in closing down the Keystone pipeline. He's been in favor of these EPA restrictions. 70% of light vehicles by 2032, new sales have to be EVs under the Biden-Harris-Casey EPA. He has been a soft voice. He's very reluctant to ever take a stand on anything, but time and again he's voted for fracking restrictions and legislation. He's voted for a cap and trade policy, which would be devastating to Pennsylvania workers and families. So this is a guy who buys into the idea that we need to eliminate fossil fuel consumption. And the fact of the matter is that natural gas in Pennsylvania is incredibly important for our national strength, our geopolitical strength. It's incredibly important for our economy. These are great jobs, hundreds of thousands of them that we could double or triple in the years to come. And finally, it's great for our environment because this clean natural gas exported around the world will replace coal-fired plants in India and China, which will be great for our global climate. So this is
Dave McCormick. I want to make sure we close by letting people know how to give you money. Dave McCormick, PA, right? That's the website.
Yeah,
Dave McCormick, PA.
But to learn more about me and all my policies, Hugh, I've laid it all out there. Anything you want to know about what I believe, you can find DaveMcCormickPA.com. I'm out on the campaign trail, running hard between now and November 5th.
And the reason I bring it up, I talked to Steve Daines last week. It's off the record. I'm not going to tell you what we talked about, but he's feeling pretty optimistic about you. And I guess the small donor reaction, which is so critical, is an indication of enthusiasm. Even if it's $3 or $30 or $5 or $50, it matters for people to go to DaveMcCormickPA.com and get involved because those numbers indicate a lot to other people.
Yeah, those numbers are growing like crazy in terms of tens of thousands of new donors every quarter coming on and donating small dollars. And honestly, it makes a huge difference. This is the most expensive race in the country, but I'm honored by it. I mean, it's such a privilege to be doing this and to feel like you've got that support from people across our Commonwealth, across our country. It's just the boost you need going into the home stretch here.
25truth.com if you want to read the truth about Project 2025. I'm older than you are, Kevin Roberts, and therefore I've heard the cliche more often, the most important election of our lifetime. And I really think this is 1980 style stakes. I think it will be a disaster if Kamala Harris is president. The people that she's surrounded with, the stuff she doesn't know, the things she thinks she knows, her lack of skill, just an utter disaster. How do you view this election?
Look, I view it not even as a policy leader, which I am, but as an early American historian. So with a long view, and I, like you, have heard this comment, the most important election in our lifetime. It is for me. I'm 50 years old. This is the most important election I know in my lifetime. And even if we didn't have this interesting characterization of the two major candidates, so in other words, put the personalities off to the side, everything is at stake in 2024. I actually think the American Republic is teetering on the balance. I'm optimistic about the future. I want to be really clear about that. And we don't do this false alarmism at Heritage, but I think everything is at stake. When I was growing up, Hugh, the left was not a dangerous ideology. It certainly was an ideology I disagreed with because of its statism and fondness for centralized power. But right now, they're doing everything from centralizing power to violating free speech for those of us on the right, to redefining what it is to be a boy or a girl. Everything is at stake. And therefore, I think speaking ideologically from the top of the ticket all the way down to the bottom of the ticket for school board races, for city council races, Americans really need to be dialed into the issues to help them understand how they ought to be voting this fall.
This is why I love the Heritage Foundation. People should go to heritage.org and become a contributor, become a supporter, become a member. I want to close with this. You and I share a common faith. We're both Roman Catholic. I am greatly worried that if they expand the Supreme Court and they pack the court, which is in some views statutorily acceptable, that our fundamental right to practice our religion as we see fit will be impaired. Do you share that fear, Kevin Roberts?
100%. The fear of losing our religious liberty is real. We have legitimate reasons to be concerned. You know that I fought the Obama administration when I was president of Wyoming Catholic College purely on religious liberty grounds, and we won twice. And that was now 10 years ago. And you think about what most people on the radical left believe, and it is that you and I, or our Jewish brothers and sisters, or other Christians, in addition to us, can't worship publicly. We can't even speak about religion publicly. We can't run religious institutions according to the tenets of our respective faiths. That is something that at Heritage we care so deeply about, that if, God forbid, we go down that road, we will fight tooth and nail and spend every cent to our institution's name to fight it, because if we lose religious liberty, Hugh, then we lose every other right. And it's incumbent upon us to convince our friends who maybe aren't as religious as you and me, that even though they may not go to church or share our faith, that they ought to defend religious liberty as much as you and I would be willing to do so.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I believe the Constitution is very strong, but it can also be broken, and I believe this is the administration that would break it. Kevin Roberts, thank you for joining me. You're doing a magnificent job as president of the Heritage Foundation. It's back in the game. It matters again. Heritage.org, or go to 25truth.com, heritage.org. And that was yesterday. I think Kevin Roberts has to get out there and tell people about what Heritage is doing. I also want to play for you what I told Jillian yesterday, Jillian Turner, sitting in for Martha McCollum on the show about tonight's debate. There's a lead in that's kind of funny as well. Cut 28.
Hugh, I want to make sure I get this in. This is a really key data point out from the Department of Energy today to Fox News. They tell us of the $7.5 billion allocated to build out 500,000 EV charging stations in the infrastructure law signed back in 2021, $2.4 billion has been doled out to the states already, and 69 EV stations have been built in 8 states. So again, we're looking at 69 new charging stations built at a cost to U.S. taxpayers of nearly $2.5 billion. It does not matter what you say about it. It is dismal.
I got to go see one of those. Those have got to be pretty doggone special charging stations. It's that ticket. You know, tomorrow night, when the vice president sits down with Dana Bash. Dana has to go one question at a time, not a mashup, not an accusation of flip-flop. Don't want to burn anybody's biscuits. One at a time. Do you oppose fracking? If so, why? If so, why not? Do you want to expand the Supreme Court? If so, why? If not, why not? And do you support Israel's right to retaliate against Iran by blowing up Kharg Island if they attack Israel? One question at a time. We got to get her on the record, because right now, Mark is absolutely right. And I don't want to burn Antoine's biscuits. She said all that stuff in 2019. It's on tape. We've seen it. So until she says something else, that's what Kamala Harris believes.
Amen, amen, amen. I say to you again, amen. That's what I believe. We have a right to know what this radical San Francisco, she's actually a Berkeley, Montreal, D.C., San Francisco person, believes. You got to talk about Dana Bash and what's going to happen tonight. What are your expectations, Senator?
Well, I know what she should do. I mean, I don't think Harris is entitled to the presumption that she wants the American people to know what she really thinks. I don't think Bash should treat this interview the way it should be would have been treated if it had been given 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think she should go, because the way Harris has acted is an offense against the press and the public and the process. And she ought to drill into that. And I would cross-examine her on that. I would ask her why she's hiding. I would ask her why she brought Waltz to that interview. I would ask her why she's flip-flopped on so many positions with no explanation. And I would ask her why she believes the American people should now trust anything she says. I don't think Dana is going to do that. I think she's going to ask a number of tough questions along the lines that you've outlined. But I think it's a mistake. I mean, again, it's your business, not mine. But I mean, the way Harris has treated the press and the public over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I think that should be a major subject of the interview. That's what I would expect if I was in that position. That's what I'd be preparing for.
Now, Jim, for the people who are just joining the show, I've got a new Fox News column up with 15 questions I'd like Dana to ask. She is a professional. I believe she will be fair. I believe she will be tough. But among these are, if China attempts to invade Taiwan, will American military force be used to defend the island nation? We need to know what she thinks about that, don't we, Senator?
Right. And on all these foreign policy questions, and again, you're the journalist, not me. I would try and get at presidential level questions, which is, what is America's interest in defending Taiwan? How important is that? Because the question of whether she should use military force to defend Taiwan is a legitimate presidential candidate. I mean, if you ask this of President Trump, I doubt he would give you a specific answer, because you don't want to signal to the adversary, if you think you're going to be president, exactly what you're going to do. But I would ask
That's what he says. That's exactly what he says. And you know what? That's a presidential answer. But I don't know that she can give that.
Well, it would be interesting to see what she does. I would go in the Middle East. All your questions are good ones, but I would get into the broader strategic question of, look, are you going to continue the Obama-Biden policy, which we're going to assume was your policy because you've been vice president, but are you going to continue trying to approach Iran as if they could be a responsible regional player and a member of a partnership with the United States? Because that's the underlying problem.
That's better than mine. That's a better question than mine, because the illusion of Iran as a reasonable participant in the international order is so ill-founded, and also the sunk costs are so enormous in the Democratic Party, that you'll have to say yes, and trying to explain that to America, it won't work, will it?
Well, I'd be interested. My guess is that she would not immediately latch on to the implications of the question. I mean, the first thing you would learn is she thinking on this kind of a strategic level? And I'd be interested to hear what she said. But all of
Jim,
Biden's terribleness. Sorry, go ahead.
I got to ask you this. I'm really worried about this. I've never been worried about a Democrat winning before. I thought, okay, if Barack Obama wins, that'll be good for American history. He's run as a moderate. I mean, he went very far left and he did some great damage. I wasn't, I didn't want Hillary to win because of the Supreme Court, but the country would have retained its superpower status. I am afraid if Kamala Harris wins, after 4 years, we will have lost superpower status and we won't be able to get it back. Am I being an alarmist? Because I think that's how much damage she will do.
Well, yeah, but I'm focusing on a more concrete concern, which is, okay, we have, after 4 years of Biden, the biggest war in Europe since World War II, the biggest war in the Middle East since 1973. There is an unacceptably high risk, and I'm being measured in saying this, that if we elect her, we're going to have a war in the Indo-Pacific. And it is very likely that if that happens, it will not be a war where we're arguing over whether to send artillery shells to Taiwan, the way we've done with Ukraine. That's highly likely to be a war where we get attacked, our forces get attacked, and it's also, there's a high risk that the homeland will get attacked in the space architecture or through cyber. This is what people, when they war game this is something they have to take into account. And in other words, we're looking at escalating armed conflict in the Indo-Pacific. At least there's an unacceptably
That's very
high
sobering.
risk.
That's very sobering. I would like to hear her talk about that. Commander-in-Chief questions is all that she should be asked. And that's one of them. Is it a fair question to ask about military recruitment? Because I think we have a crisis on our hands that's extraordinary. I think she'll make it worse. I don't know who wants her to be their commander-in-chief. Do you?
Yeah, it's a fair question to ask because it's such a crisis. I think in a normal campaign, I mean, it would be a fair question to ask, but I think to expect a person running for president in a normal situation to understand recruitment policy and talk with any in any specifics about it, I think is asking too much. But in this context, because we have the worst recruiting crisis that I can remember, particularly in the Army, yeah, I think it's a very legitimate question. And the problem she would have, of course, is that in order to fix the crisis, and Mike Waltz talked about this yesterday, we need to get rid of we need to professionalize, military policy at the highest level. I mean, we have highly professional, competent servicemen and women, but the policies, the DEI, the vaccine policies, I mean, it's turning off exactly the kind of people that you want to recruit in the military. So I think it's very fair, and I think the answer is to do what Reagan did. I mean, to go in and concentrate on building a warfighting force with high standards for everybody, including the generals and flags, by the way, and that includes physical standards, to have priorities, to insist on plans from the chiefs to accomplish those priorities. And then if they can't execute the plan, to get people who can. That's how Reagan built the military. And I think if we have the right people at the top of the Pentagon, and I'm certain we will, if Trump gets elected, I think you'll see the recruiting crisis ease pretty quickly.
Jim, my last question. I have great confidence in Dana Bash. I worked with her long enough, did 4 debates with her. I was with her at the RNC this past spring or the spring of last year when we were pitching debates. And I've said, you guys can trust Dana Bash as a professional. She did a fine job with Jake Tapper in the first debate. Do you trust her tonight to push hard on questions that Americans need answered by Kamala Harris, not by Tim Walz?
Well, based on what I've observed, and especially because you vouch for her, yeah, I expect she's going to ask some tough questions. What I don't expect is that, and I got to be upfront about it, and I'm sure she's a fine journalist. I don't expect her to treat Harris and cross-examine Harris the way she would cross-examine, for example, me, if I had done the things that Harris had done to snub the press, the public, and the people in the 4 weeks since then. I mean, this is an enormous foul that Harris, a foul against the process that she's committed. And
you're really mad about this. You're really angry about this.
Because look, she's running for the most important job in the country under circumstances where she was I don't want to say unknown, but I mean, she wasn't liked, and she was part of an administration that the public's viewed has failed. And now for a month, she's gone into hiding. Her first interview, she's bringing Tim Waltz with her. And you're right, it's obviously a security blanket. It'd be one thing if she'd done 10 or 12 interviews and then she wanted to bring Waltz. That would be fine, okay? But
You know
she
that
should
Mark
go one-on-one.
Levin, our friend Mark Levin, taped a 2-hour interview with Donald Trump that will air on Sunday night. Can you imagine Kamala Harris doing a 2-hour interview with anybody? I mean, Rachel Maddow, she would not make it through the 2 hours, Jim Talent. I don't think.
Well, I got to be fair. Donald Trump has energy I don't have. I wouldn't, if I was in the middle of a campaign like this, I wouldn't do 2 hours. I'd probably do 20 minutes with you, the way Dave McCormick just did. But no, I don't blame her for not doing that.
I'm on special report tonight on the panel with Brett Baer. At least at this hour I am. That sometimes changes, stuff happens, but I'm very glad to be on. I've got a column over at Fox News with my 15 questions for Kamala Harris. I don't think we'll get through 15. I'm hoping Dana gets 5 of them at least. They're all important. They're commander-in-chief questions. I do not care about her cooking habits, when she met Doug, how the second gentleman is adjusting, how she gets along with Tim Waltz. I do not care. I want to know, because the country needs to know, how she will be a commander-in-chief. And if they want to, ask her about the crazy housing plan that she's got. I mean, that's the only bit of policy we've had thus far, is that she's going to put price controls on groceries to stop price gouging, and she's going to give $25,000 to every new home buyer, first-time new home buyer. That's the craziest thing ever. I talked to Andrew Del Rey of andrewandtodd.com. They're sponsors of my show. But I call Andrew because he and Todd really know the mortgage business and the housing business, upside down, sideways, whatever you need to know, they know. You need to buy a new house and you're a first-time buyer and you need to do FHA with 3.5% down, they can do that for you. You're a VA loan and you want your VA fees waived, there's a way to do that. You're a senior, 62 years and older, and you want a reverse mortgage. Maybe you want to wait a few years because the terms get better the older you are, because the closer you are to going to your eternal reward. It's a tricky business, reverse mortgages. They work in many cases to get cash out of illiquid assets that you can put to work for yourself in a responsible way if you're 62 years and older and you're living in your primary residence. You never make another mortgage payment again. So you call them about all that stuff, and they'll work with you. 888-888-1172, or visit andrewandtodd.com. But I called Andrew because I wanted to know, how is the business? Are people getting mortgages again? He said, oh, yeah, it's picking up. And do you know why? It's not because of Kamala Harris offering $25,000 to every new home buyer who's a first-time new home buyer. Because interest rates are forward-looking, and they expect Jerome Powell to make 3 rate cuts. And the first one in September could be a 1/4 point, could be a 1/2 point, could be 3/4 of a point. And that will drive down rates. Already, they're at 6.5 for most people. That's very good news. It will go back up again if Kamala Harris is elected, as will the cost of every house. Whenever she says we're going to build 3 million new houses, it fries my interior circuit board. For one reason, I represented landowners and builders for 30 years. I'm retired. I don't need your work. I don't want any work. I wouldn't do any more permitting if you paid me even double what I used to charge, and I charge it a lot because I was a very good land use lawyer. I know the process. I know the local, the state, and the federal process. And here I am here to tell you, with God as my witness, governments do not build houses efficiently if they build them at all. The average cost of a homeless unit in LA is north of $500,000 because they don't know how to do it, even if they've got the land. You've got to get a Pardee, a Lusk, a Kaufman and Bruh, I'm naming all my old clients. I represent these people forever. She can't do that. It's not possible. All they can do is screw up the housing market, and she's intent on doing that. Do not vote for her if you want a house. Go to andrewandtodd.com. Don't forget Relief Factor as well. Relief Factor keeps me moving every day. Did 4 miles yesterday. I'm taking today off because getting ready to say goodbye to the 2-year-old. So I'm going to be spending more time with her at the playground today. But I'm taking Relief Factor. Listen to Mary Catherine Ham yesterday on Getting Hammered. And she's been keeping track, because she got 4 kids. How many times does she lift a child? In the first 2 hours of the day, she had lifted a child 30 times. And she got 2 toddlers, a baby, a toddler, and the big girls. And she has to lift the big girls sometimes too. And I just got to think, oh, you're back. Because I've been lifting the 2-year-old probably 30, 40, 50 times a day. Different set of muscles than walking or trundling or sprinting or anything else I do. And Relief Factor works. 1-800-4-RELIEF, or go to relieffactor.com. Just type in Relief Factor at any search engine. Make sure you ask for the discounted first pack. I love Relief Factor. You will too. You wrote Sacred Duty, a best-selling book about your time in the Old Guard at Arlington and the history of the Old Guard at Arlington National Cemetery. So I believe you to be the expert available to the media to discuss what happened when President Trump accompanied the families of the fallen at Abbey Gate on Monday. I have not seen you quoted anywhere. Did everyone try and reach you for your informed view of what happened?
No, Hugh, you and I are the first people to discuss it. And I'll say I haven't discussed it with President Trump or his campaign team, but judging by the media reports and also the deep state political hacks that the Biden administration installed at the Pentagon to oversee our uniformed military, rushing off this morning to have a big story anonymously reported in the Washington Post, it seems to me like they did everything to try to prevent President Trump from going with the families of the fallen to Arlington National Cemetery because they didn't want to highlight Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's disgraceful failures in Afghanistan. Again, based on the reporting I've seen, this is not Donald Trump's idea. This was not the campaign's idea. This was a request by families of some of the 13 brave Americans who were killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago this week because of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's inept failure to plan for the orderly withdrawal of Afghanistan. Families, whom I would mention, have never gotten so much as a phone call, much less a meeting with Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. So President Trump, of course, accepted their invitation to come commemorate the loss of their children or their parents, their husband, their wives, and to celebrate their service and their sacrifice for this nation. You can see for yourself from the photos and videos that are online, this is not a campaign event. He wasn't wearing a red MAGA hat. People weren't flying Trump banners around him. They were peacefully and respectfully and in a dignified fashion honoring the service and the sacrifice of those fallen heroes and their loved ones. But you had, again, according to the Washington Post, senior DOD officials who spent weeks planning on how to handle this event and then apparently caused a scene at the site and now are using the company town broadsheet, the Washington Post, to try to gin up yet another controversy or scandal around Donald Trump. Here's what the scandal is. It's not Donald Trump honoring the sacrifice of those 13 fallen heroes and their families. It's Kamala Harris and Joe Biden sending them into a situation that was needlessly dangerous, chaotic, and hectic to the point where they were killed by a suicide bomber, and then not even having the decency to ever call their families to thank them for their service and express their condolences. That's the real scandal view.
Now, Senator, I have not revealed this yet until this moment. I know the Gold Star families from Abbey Gates organizer. I know the individual that they have hired to help them tell their stories. And I was invited by that individual to go on Monday, and I would gladly have gone, but I'm not there. I'm up north. And so I replied, thank you. I'm deeply honored, because I was honored to be invited by the families, but I couldn't go. I would like, again, you may have to remind people who are new listeners or new affiliates what the Old Guard is and what your service with it is, because then I have a question about photography at Arlington, but I want the audience to know you actually know what you're talking about when you talk about Arlington National Cemetery. Can you explain why?
Sure, Hugh. So the Old Guard is the 3rd Infantry, the oldest active duty regiment in the Army. It's stationed at Fort Myer, which is adjacent to Arlington, separated by just a small stone wall. And they perform the military honor funerals for Army veterans in the cemetery. Now, there are other similar units for all the services. The Army is by far the largest, just because it's the largest service and had the largest number of personnel serving in our nation's wars throughout history. But they perform funerals in there 5 days a week, almost every day of the year. The rules on photography, as you can see, Hugh, just by going online and, say, Googling Joe Biden, Section 60, Arlington, and clicking on images, are pretty relaxed. There's all kinds of images of Joe Biden walking around in Section 60. Or for that matter, go to Arlington National Cemetery or the Old Guard's own social media pages. They have beautiful moving pictures of the soldiers, the caisson, the incredible scenery inside the cemetery, the monuments and memorials, the leaves changing in the fall, snow falling in the winter. These are all beautiful, wonderful images. And it's very common today for families to want to have photographs and video of their own funerals. Not so much when I was serving there in 2007 and 2008, but with the ubiquitous rise of smartphones and cameras, people increasingly have their own videographers there. You can see photos that are very moving of Gold Star parents and widows in Section 60 visiting the gravesite of their loved ones. The only rule against photography or videos of which I'm aware, and that we on occasion had to enforce, Hugh, is when onlookers or bystanders wanted to capture images of a funeral that had not been cleared by the family in advance. And they don't mean disrespect you. They don't mean to intrude on the family's privacy. They just don't know better. I mean, if you're one of thousands and thousands of people who visit the cemetery every single day, and you're there to see the sites, to go to Section 60, to go to the tomb, to visit Joe Lewis's grave, to visit Blackjack Pershing's grave, and all of a sudden you hear the clickety-clack of those horseshoes, and you turn around and there's a caisson and there's soldiers marching, then many people understandably would want to capture those images. But to respect the dignity and the privacy of the ceremony, the Old Guard in Arlington will have a handful of people who aren't marching or performing the funeral that will politely and in a quiet fashion ask them not to take those photographs. Of course, they always comply. Again, they didn't know any better. That's the only rule of which I'm aware.
And I must tell you, if there's a rule, I've broken it many times. For example, my friend Jan Janura, who runs the Wild Adventure, his father is buried at Arlington. And I've promised him the next time I go, I will find Mr. Janura's resting place, and I will take a photo of that. My wife's grandfather and grandmother are there, and we've taken photographs of that. No one has ever said a word to us, and I am especially amazed. This is a media critique. You were in the Old Guard. I don't know if anyone else in Congress was in the Old Guard. I don't know if anyone in the media was in the Old Guard. How do they not know to call you to ask you, or do they know and don't want your opinion?
Well, I think they know that I'll point out that it seems to me, but again, based on all the published reports, that it's the civilian political hacks that have been installed in Lloyd Austin's office and installed in the office of Christine Wormuth, the Secretary of the Army, who's been a terrible disaster in that position, who have tried to gin up this controversy, and who has, in fact, in advance, tried to create made-up rules, such as the rule that, you can't take photographs in Section 60, unlike every single other section of the cemetery. Again, Hugh, just go on the internet and Google Section 60 and click on images, and you'll see thousands and thousands of images. And yeah, like you, Hugh, I do it as well. I happen to be in Washington pretty regularly because I'm in the U.S. Senate, and I know several people, either with whom I served or whose families I've gotten to know through my service in the Senate. And if I'm in town and can do so, I'll go to Arlington on the anniversary of their death, and I'll take a photograph of their headstone, which has almost always been marked with coins or photographs or beer bottles or flags by friends who visited earlier in the day or just people who pass by and notice the date, and I'll send it to them. Again, this is not something that is a long-standing, pre-existing rule of which the Trump campaign should have been aware. I think this is a controversy that has been ginned up on purpose by the civilian political hacks acting as apparatchiks inside the Department of Defense because they want to distract attention away from Kamala Harris's and Joe Biden's disastrous failures in Afghanistan and lack of decency and even calling those grieving parents and families members to express their condolences and what they should express, which is their regrets and apologies.
Now, Senator, I have the same theory about the National Archives and the Mar-a-Lago documents case, that was ginned up by low-level or high-level bureaucrats at the archives. I know the archives probably as well as any agency besides OPM, which I ran, but I know the archives, and they're full of political hacks. And someone started a controversy, and this is the cartel of media and Democrat power brokers and big money in this country, which I think we're going to throw out. Now, let me go to Dana Bash. I have confidence in Dana because I worked with her on 4 debates. I recommended her to the RNC. I have great confidence in her asking commander-in-chief questions tonight, such as, does Israel have the right to do what they did over the weekend with Hezbollah? And if the answer is yes, can they do it to Iran? I have great faith in her. Do you?
Hugh, I think she's going to be under great pressure from CNN, which depends on its viewers, to go soft on Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Even if she wants to be tough but fair, Hugh, there's too many things to press Kamala Harris on. There's too many far left positions she's taken, so she can only scratch the surface. But, in the end, we don't need Dana Bash to ask tough questions. We don't even need Kamala Harris to do this interview. We know where she stands. She's been vice president and has a failed record for 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration. She was in the Senate for 4 years, and she was the most liberal senator. And she said what she believed when she ran for president in 2020. The American people know where she stands.
Well, there are two things on which we don't know. That one, I'd like to hear her say whether or not she supports expanding the Supreme Court, which is a statutory action. It's radical. It's revolutionary. It will destroy the rule of law. And I'd like her on tape answering that. And then I have no idea what she thinks about fracking today. She was way against it 4 years ago, but it's all muddied up now. So do you think we'll get those two questions, the expansion of the Supreme Court and fracking at least?
Those would be two good questions, Hugh. And again, we don't need the questions, though. We know where she stands. She has said so in her own voice on camera when she was a 54-year-old woman running for president. These are not youthful opinions expressed in high school op-eds.
Good point.
That one might reasonably say, like, yeah, I wish I'd left that unsaid when I was 17 years old in high school. She said all these things when she was serving in the United States Senate seeking the presidency. So we don't really need to hear what Dana Bash has to say tonight or what Kamala Harris said in response. The American people know that Kamala Harris is a dyed-in-the-wool San Francisco liberal.
Josh, Michael Oren is upset with Israel that that's all they did. Are you hearing that generally in the Jewish American community, that they ought to have done more, they ought to have gone to war with Hezbollah and pushed them back from the northern border?
There's a lot of debate and disagreement within the Jewish community, within the pro-Israel Jewish community. I wouldn't say that is the dominant sentiment. I think if you look in Israel itself, Hugh, there's growing momentum for trying to get some kind of deal and get the hostage. Really, the emphasis has been among the Israeli public to get the hostages released. It's been such a painful, year. We're approaching the October 7th anniversary. But look, there's some voices that certainly led by the Biden administration that were trying to use diplomacy to kind of make sure things didn't escalate. And there are other voices, more hawkish voices, that think that Israel should have taken out Hezbollah and been more aggressive at going after them. So I don't think there's any consensus. There's a divide in Israel. There's a divide within the American Jewish community here.
All right. My second question goes to tonight's interview of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz by Dana Bash. I've worked with Dana on debates before. She's a consummate professional. I have great confidence in her tonight. I would like to have her ask about what her acceptance speech was when she said terrible thing happened on 10/7, quote, at the same time, close quote. It seemed like moral equivalence to me. Did it strike you that way, Josh Kraushaar?
Well, that's been the playbook of the Biden administration. that it is always like, on the other hand, consider the humanitarian needs of the Palestinians in Gaza, even though you hardly heard the word Hamas mentioned before Harris spoke at the convention on Thursday. I mean, that was the takeaway from the convention writ large, and where the Democratic Party is right now vis-a-vis the Middle East. Hugh, the word Israel was only mentioned by the Goldberg Poland family, whose son Hirsch is being held hostage by Hamas. Not a single speaker until Kamala Harris even mentioned Israel, no less Hamas.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, that it is extraordinary. And I've been to conventions going back to 2004, Hugh, and there's always been a much more outspoken and public display of support for Israel. The fact that the bar has gone so low as to the fact that I thought Harris gave an adequate speech, but you're right. She kind of did. On one hand, Israel has the right to defend itself. On the other hand, look at the starving children in Gaza, and let's get a ceasefire. So,
John, I got to pause for a moment because I didn't know that. I remember the former DNC chair, the Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, always being pro-Israel, almost to a person pro-Israel, and lots of pro-Israel. That's why 70% of the Jewish American vote traditionally goes Democratic. They mentioned it once.
Before Harris's speech, not a single political speaker mentioned the word Israel at the convention.
Wow.
Maybe Warnock, when Warnock said it, comparing Israel to God, but there was actually no public display of support for Israel, and I don't think there were even a mention beyond the hostage family at all at the Democratic convention. And I was covering.
I would ask her about that tonight. I think Dana Bash ought to ask her, what do you think about Israel? And don't tell me they have the right to defend themselves. Tell me what they should do about Iran. Because I think if Iran hits them again, they ought to blow up Karg Island and bounce the rubble. What do you think, Josh?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of, in a Trump administration, I think you'd have support for a more muscular policy dealing with Iran and its proxies. And that's sort of the issue at play. And I'd love to hear, I agree with you, Hugh, I'd love to hear some more detail on what Harris would support if Iran continues to threaten Israel as it has over the last year and more. The other thing about speaking about the Democratic Party and Harris, the party, I was struck by the fact that when I talked to Governor Josh Shapiro, almost, was a finalist to be running mate for Kamala Harris. I asked him when I was in Chicago what he thought about Biden's comment that the protesters, the anti-Israel protesters, had a point, and he sort of dodged the question and didn't want to go there. And I mean, that is where the party, it's less about who the nominee is, and it's more about sort of the party bringing in these anti-Israel activists, these anti-Israel voices, and trying not to say anything at all about one of the most important national security issues of our time.
Josh, quick exit. Josh Shapiro is the best talent they've got on their bench. I'm still stunned she didn't pick him. Why do you think she didn't pick him? We got 1 minute.
Yeah, well, look, I think Tim Walz has, he certainly brought something to the table in terms of style. The coach, I mean, I think she likes this whole Kamala and the coach branding. I don't think there's a ton of substance. I don't think, if you look at the governor's record, and we've talked about that on this show, Hugh, it's a very progressive record. So it gives Trump and Vance a whole lot of opportunities to go after them. But I think there was a comfort level with Walz that maybe she didn't have with Shapiro. Look, Hugh, Pennsylvania is the most important state on the map. If the Democrats if Democrats lose Pennsylvania,
it's done.
Ball game
it's over.
Probably over. So that was curious to me. I think Shapiro would have helped them on the margins.
I still can't believe it.